I would like to welcome everyone to our webinar today of the price task force and how to defend against price increases that we see. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself and my co-speaker Wolfgang. My name is Tim von der Decken and I lead our office in Germany. I do a lot of large procurement transformation programs and have particular focus on the indirect spend categories. And more recently, we are supporting a lot of our clients in Europe with helping them to defend against the price increases on the direct as well as on the indirect space. And I'll hand over to Wolfgang to introduce himself a little bit. Wolfgang.
Yep, well, welcome everybody. My name is Wolfgang. I've got more than 25 years of experience in the procurement space, both in industry and also in consulting, such as Roland Berger and the Physio. I, like Tim, am part of the German leadership team, and I lead large-scale transformation and cost optimization program, focus on pharmaceuticals, tech and manufacturing companies mainly, and I also lead our raw materials practice at Physio.
Great.
Good.
Thanks so much. Just one word about Physio for those who do not know. We have a couple of people who signed up for the first time today. We are basically a very focused niche procurement consulting company. So we've been founded in the year 2000 and have about 650 consultants in the United States, in different offices in Europe and in the Middle East. And we support our clients in what we call strategic sourcing, so helping them to reduce their external cost holistically, starting from demand and specification over supplier consolidation, tendering, negotiation, and driving savings to the bottom line. And that's what we are known for. So internally, we are organized by categories, and we do have expertise in over 150 of those categories. So that's what we bring to the table, next to also additional resources who work hand in hand with our client teams to deliver such results. And if we start a little bit to set the frame, as all of you know and experience, basically at the moment we are seeing unprecedented price increases driven by three main factors. Obviously, the conflict in Russia, Ukraine. Secondly, the COVID implications, and certainly also by the triggered lockdown of China, which is blocking a lot of the harbors and shipments from there. So, you know, across all industries and also most of the categories, we see suppliers coming to our clients and asking for higher prices. So very obviously in the segments, you know, in the direct segments, such as metals, palladium, aluminium, and so on, where a lot of the sources are actually from Russia or Ukraine. In oil and gas, where we have seen, you know, doubling of prices and high insecurity going forward as well, relating to will there be further embargoes and, you know, will prices continue to rise. But also, you know, indirect categories on sea freight, road transport, where we have significant shortages of drivers, even in Europe, and seen significant price increases triggered by fuel cost, which is a component in all of these cost elements, but also by the shortage of drivers. Healthcare segment, you know, active product ingredients that go in, and also we see in Ukraine has been a market where a lot of testing has been done for medication. So there's also, you know, for new drug development, there's also a shortage there. Agriculture, everyone has experienced recently the shortages, at least in Germany, the shortages of oil and also wheat, you know, sunflower seeds and so on. So more to come as the conflict is continuing. Also, obviously, petroleum-based products such as, you know, fatty acids and input costs for soaps, detergents, and so on are increasing significantly. with impact on all of that. And if you look at which industries are most affected by that, it's obviously the manufacturing industrial sector that is heavily affected by it, but also in the consumer sector, we see a lot of price increases, while financial services, media companies, also healthcare companies are typically less affected. But I think everyone, at least that I talk to, has recently been confronted by suppliers wanting significant price increases and facing shortages in the supply chain. And there are the questions. Also, thank you for the questions we got ahead of time. The question always is, which price increase is justified and to what level is justified? Because when you have such a massive amount of price increases coming in, you need to select which ones to focus on and where basically to find alternatives versus where it may make sense to accept the price increase because there's simply no short-term alternative. And that's what we want to address and talk a little bit about how we do that with our clients, and maybe it's an approach that is useful for some of you as well. So it starts basically, we typically establish a 3-step process to tackle this any incoming price demand. So one core element is understanding the key cost drivers and cost targets by having visibility of how the cost breaks down, understanding the different cost elements, and then being in a position to model when individual factors change, how does that impact your final product price, and what should the change of a raw material price that you can follow on the market, how should that impact your product costs that you buy? The second is what we call, and what we will focus on in more detail today, is a task force, basically how to counteract then price increases by, prioritizing where do you see risks of supply in particular, and where do you have risk exposure, and where basically are more easily either alternatives available, or where do you have good arguments to counteract those price increases, and preparing the negotiations with the suppliers, preparing initial answers you get back with to them, and then basically determining which price increases to accept versus which to defend. And also an element which is increasingly important, and where we from our clients have seen increased interaction, is actually working closer with the sales departments as procurement also, to understand what is our exposure towards our end customers and which elements of the price increases can potentially be passed on to customers, and ensuring that our agreements with end customers, where we can influence them at least going forward, maybe are mirroring better agreements with price clauses that we close with our suppliers. And then in the medium to longer term, how do we prepare today to avoid such situations going forward by more looking at our long-term strategy, determining where maybe we are in a single source situation today, but where where the supplier is taking advantage of this, and where we hence want to build up a second source or a multi-source strategy, building capabilities to establish target cost modeling going forward, and in equipping our teams to do such cost modeling, to be able to better defend price increases going forward, and overall how to set up a risk mitigation strategy, and also feed the risks that we are identifying into the budget for this year and next year. That's basically the process we want to talk a little bit about today and go into more detail. And Wolfgang will walk us through a first example, which relates to the prerequisites of how to basically ensure your team is equipped with a target cost approach and able to model the impact of price increases on your products.
Thanks, Tim. So when we work with our clients, and we're doing this for many currently, one of the main examples that I'd like to share with you, and one of the main approaches that we see that suppliers take, is obviously First, to try and get through a price increase pretty bluntly. In terms of why do I say bluntly? Often we hear things like, "Oh, well, you're looking at the news. Gas has increased by 100%. That's why we need a price increase of 30%." Or, "Oh, logistics is very tight and there's no drivers. The diesel is up by 50%, and that's why we need a price increase of 30%. And I'm actually quite astonished, and I suppose many of you have heard those sort of pretty blunt approaches, amazingly blunt approaches, actually, by suppliers to try and get through price increases and to influence our buyers through a very very simple approach. And what we have seen in our current projects and our current client assignments is that obviously preparation and a good view of how a price increase in any component really affects the top line price. That understanding and the preparation of getting to that understanding is the single key initiative that you have to follow. Meaning, it's easiest done in a 4-step approach, which we usually recommend. So first of all, if you don't know what price elements or cost elements are within any component or any service, then try and get a rough understanding of which cost elements are really inherent in a price of anything you buy. It might be a service, it might be a product. We've here depicted an example of packaging, in a box packaging, just to illustrate the case. There are more than 6 to 7 main cost elements, but they all have a different weight. So the first understanding you need to get, what are the cost elements and what is the weight of those roughly. Don't be too over analytic, but get a rough understanding through benchmarks, through asking around, through information you might have of price, of weights and price components or cost components within a price. As an example, I have a price, and we've had this. If a supplier comes and says, "Look, I need a price increase of 10% because logistics have increased by 50%." In the case of inner box packaging, the price or the cost of logistics is only 5% within the overall cost. That would mean that a reasonable ask from a supplier would be roughly 2.5% of price increase. That's a reasonable ask. And only then, and that's the step 3, if historically the supplier the price hasn't increased above market index. So a third step to check is to actually look back and historically, not just as a current snapshot, but historically, how have prices evolved in the past? And if those have gone up above an inflation index or above market index that you might have, then the case for increasing the price now becomes diminishes from your perspective. So it's not enough in our view to just look at the snapshot, but to also look back at the historic price evolution. And then fourth step, go and determine a reasonable and acceptable price. So if confronted, you need to basically sit down and do your homework first. Look at the components, look at individual weights, look at the past, and then come up with an own opinion on, okay, well, we believe based on our information that 1, 2, 3, 4% are a reasonable price increase for a certain component or a certain service, and that is then something you confront the supplier with. Obviously, when the supplier comes with a price increase request, then the first thing that you want to ask is, please justify why are you asking for a price increase as you're asking for, and give us some reasoning and rationale. The more rationale you get, and obviously you will ask at that time, it's the best time to ask for a cost breakdown. The more information you get at that time, the better you will be equipped for an upcoming negotiation. Tim.
Yeah, that's a little bit, the price task force that we now establish with our clients. And it basically starts, with making sure all price increase requests hit that central task force, are registered, are evaluated, and are acted up on in a consistent way. So we typically install such a task force, and also, unless it's a critical material or a single source material, basically we inform the suppliers that the price increase is rejected, and we reverse basically the burden of proving that price increase to the supplier, and request additional information in case the client doesn't have the breakdown of the cost, as Wolfgang has demonstrated for the packaging elements. Then we request those details from the supplier and basically ask for an explanation. But that's basically what is happening. So, very often we see already that suppliers accept the rejection, and that they need or that they request 2-3 weeks until they can provide such information. So in such cases already, for that 1 month, you continue to have the same favorable terms and conditions that you previously agreed upon. But obviously, that is then subject to further negotiation. What we initiate then, after rejecting this with such a task force, is on the one hand side, that we conduct a benchmark comparison for things where either we, with our category know-how, have benchmarks and can say, okay, the multiplier for temp labor should be 1.5 or 1.6, depending on the volume, depending on the qualification, while your supplier is requesting a higher multiplier. So either, you have a very good benchmark that enables you to have a negotiation on that basis, or as before, we ask the supplier to basically detail and reverse the burden of proof to the supplier to detail his price increase. And we provide him with a template to say, this is the level of breakdown I would need to have your price increase justified. And we give him the different elements. And that works particularly well when in a category such as packaging, you have several suppliers and you get responses either through an RFP or in that process from several of suppliers. So you can then, even if you don't have a good price breakdown model in your team, you can collate the different information, compare the different elements, and take your own judgment of how such a cost breakdown should look out. We then prepare a negotiation strategy and conduct the negotiation, and during that negotiation, we basically agree on a new price. Elements to consider in the negotiation, other than information from the price breakdown, things that we in such a price task force look down, is very often, for instance, how has the profit of that supplier developed during the last 2 years where we had COVID? Has their profit developed faster than our profit has developed? What is our negotiation power? Is it something where he is the only supplier that can supply us with those goods, or is it something where I can find alternative sources of supply if I want? How appropriate do we consider the price increase? How well has he documented the price increase, and how well is it justifiable? What other options do I have to maybe make the supplier happy? Can I award him additional volumes rather than accepting a price increase, so increasing his margin by giving him more business if possible? And if none of that is possible, at least I want to define already in the negotiations the trigger points that will allow us to go back when the market situation change, and basically request a price decrease when, let's say, fuel prices are going down, or indexed prices are going down. So I want to make sure that at least, even if I have to eat and accept the price increase at this moment in time, that we define the trigger points when price increases can be reversed. Also, as a result of that, we sometimes, identify suppliers that we want to phase out because we know exactly they take advantage of the situation. The price increase is not justified, but we also have no option of other than accepting it because it's a single source or it's a approved material that cannot be replaced. So in such cases, cases, then we recommend basically to phase out the supplier over time. And also the activities of the price task force involve potentially engaging closer with the sales team and seeing if some of the price increases can be passed on to our end customers, through either changing their agreements or by making sure that going forward we basically close client agreements which are more aligned to our supply agreements. Because then we basically pass on information or pass the risk on. We build a natural hedge. We pass that risk on to our customers. And also, what is very useful in that process is the more information your team collects during their standard RFPs. To give you an example, in logistics, we now get a lot of price increases, and suppliers are quite unique in terms of the arguments they come up with, how they want to justify the price increase. So let's say in logistics, we get a lot of increase requests because they say we need to upgrade our street fleet to the Euro 6 norm. But if you collected already last year during your tender to what level their vehicles are already adjusted to the new Euro 6 norm, then it enables you to basically defend that price increase better. And say, to our knowledge, or the information you gave us last year, already 70% of your fleet is upgraded, so the cost shouldn't be affecting 100% of your fleet, but only 30% of your fleet. So it's really useful, along all the time when your team does tenders, to not only focus on the commercial elements, but also include always some price breakdowns, ideally, and ideally also some qualitative information that helps you to better understand your supplier cost position and use it in future negotiations. And even if you don't have it, then do it going forward, equip the team to do so. What we as basically, how we enrich or what is comes in quite handy in such task force is access to benchmarks. You can have them from external sources, from the SIPS Association, or from other sources. We obviously also collect them through our works that we do for clients. And it's quite handy to, as I said, for the indirect categories, it's quite easy and comparable to get benchmarks and help you judge how appropriate a price is or a price increase is. But also there's other research networks that you can have access to. What is quite helpful on the direct cost side, if you have models such as Facton or Saphirion software that helps you to calculate the price breakdown and separate the individual elements. And then it's also quite helpful to have tools that help you quickly identify appropriate suppliers. There's quite innovative tools in the market that basically through public information can identify suppliers of your competitors. So there is such tools in the market, and that can be quite useful, because very often a supplier that is good to serve your competitor is probably good enough to serve you as well. And in that sense, it can help the supplier onboarding process. So those are tools that we typically have access to, that we equip the task force to have access to, and to help them basically defend and also prioritize price increase requests to focus on where we see additional benefits. Also, we equip the teams, with a form to help prioritize those incoming requests. As I said, we bundle them at the task force, and then we basically need to prioritize them, because we get a lot of these requests at the moment. So we ask the teams to basically model the impact of any given price increase. What volume is affected, what is the total impact in monetary terms, and so on. Is there alternative sources of supplies? And we have such templates that help the task force to basically present their case, and they need to also, to the price task force, the individual category managers at the end seek the approval via a weekly process if they can go ahead with the price increase that they negotiated as part of the process, so that we have transparency and can decide, okay, it seems well documented, it seems appropriate, let's go ahead with this price increase. Or we need to initiate more strategic medium-term actions to look for new suppliers, because we need to, in the short term, accept the price increase, but we don't want to do so in the medium term. So we need to initiate action today to be in a better position tomorrow. Some of the longer term actions, I have listed here and differentiated them between, internal and external. So, internal actions, to deal with scarce supply can involve increasing the stock levels to be less vulnerable to market change, looking at can materials be used in a more intense way? How do we deal with scrap material? Can we do more material recycling? Can we improve the strategic planning? Is there a way of hedging certain material costs? And hedging, as said, can be external financial hedge that you buy, can also be an internal hedge that you basically see, can we, when we have a certain price clause with our suppliers for logistic cost, can we have a similar clause in our contracts that we close with customers? So by working as procurement closer with the sales teams, can we have a kind of natural hedge that we can more easily pass on price increases going forward? Revising specification is a typical lever that we see. So seeing if we can switch to substitute products. Obviously, it's also nothing in the short term. So we list it as a medium term, but very often we see that we can change specification. Can also be changing to higher specification. We work currently for an aluminium plant, and they basically use a higher specification gas, but it has a higher, you get more heat out of it, and therefore the total cost to do a certain process is lower as opposed to using lower specification gas. And then there's always the make versus buy, or also at the bottom we have said vertical integration. Wolfgang and I work for a client at the moment in the construction industry, and they have seen that competitors buy gypsum manufacturers on a smaller scale, and that has triggered the discussion on CEO level. Do we also want to continue buying, as we do currently, the raw materials from our suppliers, or do we also want to consider for certain markets to buy such a manufacturer? And that's where then procurement really influences the strategic agenda, because basically it's around vertical integration. So those are more longer term strategies when we are in a situation where maybe in the short term we have to eat the price increase, but we want to, on the one hand side, define the trigger points when we can counteract them again, or we want to think about alternative ways how to deal for it in the longer run. Just before we go to the questions and answers, and we already got some questions, but feel free to submit more of them right now, so Wolfgang and I will address them. It's just the last slide here, and then we go directly into the questions and answers. Just some general considerations. We know procurement is under a lot of stress right now, but literally everyone, all of our clients are affected. So we are all in the same boat, and the volatility has an impact on everyone, and we need to work for our clients on the sales side, but also on the sourcing side, and probably also an exchange with colleagues of yours how to defend such price increases, and we are also interested in learning if you have a good example to share. Everyone is affected at the moment. Second, facts and fact-based negotiations are really, really important. So when we work with our clients on strategic sourcing tenders, we make sure we collect along the process of sourcing a category in a strategic way as much information as possible. We invite suppliers, we talk to them, we learn of what our client is doing differently than competitors are doing. And the more information we have, the better we can use that information during the negotiations. So it's always worthwhile to see our strategic sourcing, so your strategic sourcing process. Do you collect enough information, and can you reuse that information during negotiations in timings such as now? Thirdly, we have a lot of incoming requests for price increases, so it's important to prioritize and evaluate the risk exposure. Most of the CPOs we work with at the moment, they've been asked by the CEO, what is the impact of this? We have seen, total cost increases of 10% and more on the total cost price. So it can have massive impact on the EBITDA margin. So it's important to understand and evaluate the risk you currently experience through the incoming requests for price increase, but also future risk. If there should be a gas embargo coming, what does it mean for our plants? Operational mitigations, look for those as well. So, increasing stock levels, seeing what alternative materials can be used. So not only in some cases we have to accept price increases in the short term, but should not forget to look for operational mitigations internally. Engaging the market. Very often we see clients only engaging the market when, let's say, you have a supplier in the Ukraine and it's no longer delivering. But also when you see massive price increases from suppliers, it's worthwhile to look for alternative sources of supplies and doing an assessment, which other countries are delivering such. We very often are able to find new countries where qualified suppliers are located, and where we can get them better prices. And I think that's it. Those are the main points. We want to go over to the question and answers again. If you have questions, we got some questions here, and I'm going to read the first one soon. Please feel free to submit your questions, answers. First really interesting question is, can you go in more deep depths in the make versus buy point? And I give you my view, and then Wolfgang, maybe you also have a view on it when we go over to the next question. Make versus buy, I see a lot of companies now for the direct materials thinking about vertical integration. So looking at, can we acquire suppliers of ours? And I see procurements there getting on the agenda, on the strategic agenda for CEOs, or for making proposals which suppliers to acquire, because for certain materials in the market there's a shortage, and you can't get more, you can't find alternative suppliers. Electronics, another example, and that's where I see a lot of openness at the moment for companies and CEOs to look at, is there a possibility for vertical integration? And similar for individual process steps, then, is there a possibility to do that something in-house where you used to use a supplier in the past? I think that's also what make versus buy involves. Wolfgang, I don't know if you have additional examples or to comment on that.
Make versus buy is really a strategic question. That's correct, Tim. What changes the picture a little bit on make versus buy is that in the past years, when we had working supply chains when we had low interest rates and price levels were stable. Oil price was pretty stable. Raw material prices were pretty stable, I must say, within bands, obviously. Companies tended, obviously, to to focus on their core competencies and outsource and buy a lot, right? From very far away places, often Asia and so on, all the elements of that equation that made companies decide to do that is they've actually changed, or many of them have changed. So nowadays, we need to factor in risk a lot more. Supply chain risk, supply chain resilience, all that has a price and a cost. This obviously, there is a need now to relook strategically at your supply chain, say, well, which parts of what we're currently buying are we not better making in-house? Where do we have the critical scale to make things in-house rather than buying it from suppliers, which would reduce the risk greatly of not getting materials in the market. And in your key categories, this is definitely a question that needs to come on the table. Again, as Tim said, this is more of a long-term approach. It's not something that'll help you fight back price increases now in the short term, but it's something that you need to address in the long term. Good. Right, I get another question. Okay, could you elaborate about latest best negotiated case for avoiding price increase based on the war or COVID situation? Could you elaborate about latest best negotiated case for avoiding price increases based on the war or COVID situation? So I'm not 100% sure if I understand the question here, I'm sorry, but I think what's a good case when Tim was presenting the cost model. Obviously, I mean, a cost model might seem something that's out of date. Good procurement departments have a pretty good view on what, or should have a pretty good view on what the cost of something should be, but it actually works. It's a proven method. The more intelligence you have, the better you are prepared. And we, at least, see a lot of examples nowadays of companies that we work with that actually don't have a view, or have a view in the directs. Pretty often the directs are well sorted out, I admit, but then you go and look at indirect procurement. We often don't have the data, or we don't have something has been not negotiated in the last 5 years, or it's always been the case, or we don't have the transparency on cost positions of our suppliers. So here it actually does help to get a view on prices, and very often I see it's the first time that we're doing this really in a structured way. So don't know if that answers your question, but all of those examples are pretty up to date. Sorry, Tim?
I mean, one question that we got also is, what is the success rate of the price task force, and where does it work best? And we see it working best on the indirects, because that's typically where clients also have less of a cost transparency, and in the A and B materials, in the B and C parts of the direct spend, because the A spend is, typically you have a lot of people focused on it, and a lot of knowledge and so on. But on the tail spend in the direct, that's where we see most advantage. We do those task forces mainly for all indirect spend, and we see a success rate between 30 to 40% of the cases that we get in. We are able to impact the price, and we typically have a 3 to 4-fold return on invest for clients in defending those, right? So it's not strategic sourcing, it's just dealing with that price increase. So it's cost avoidance mainly, but we see on the indirects in particular a pretty good outcome for it. And a question related to that, one person asked, what are trends on salaries and what sources do you use for that? Just the trends on salaries. I have a page here in the appendix that we used. You can see that's the latest here that we have in terms of 2022 forecast. So depending on where your suppliers are, and I'm sure this slide has been updated, I believe, in March. So it's also outdated right now, because we will see as the cost of living increases, we will see higher salary and wages as well coming along. But obviously, depending on the market, we see pretty high labor increases, and that will also trigger, price increases going forward. Sources of benchmarks, as we said, I mean, associations such as the SIPS Association, the BME in Germany, they have type of contracts. Consultants like Efisio have benchmarks. Also, your colleagues, CPOs that will be able to have pretty good benchmarks. So your own network will be useful. And then if you don't have a good benchmark, in particular for the indirects, again, reverse the burden or ask 2-3 other suppliers about, temp labor. What multiplier does someone else want to have from you, or what offers do you get? So it's always also getting the information from alternative suppliers. But otherwise, there is good sources. Wolfgang, do you have additional sources that you can recommend?
Well, in the raw material field, I think there are obviously the usual publications that you can get from organisms or from companies such as ICES or IHS, for example, and others. And then you've got a lot of the general or generic research institutes like Biroi that would have reasonable, up-to-date benchmarks to get from. It's really a case by case, and unfortunately, there is no one source for everything. But if you get for the main indirects, you always find the 3-4 good sources to actually get a very good view on what a price benchmark should actually be. So it's a question of shopping around.
Good. So I think we came to an end of the scheduled time. We have a couple of questions that we have not yet answered, but we'll come back to those individually. And if you have additional questions for Wolfgang or myself, please feel free to reach out. We gave our email addresses, and I'm sure Abby will be in touch with you. We are happy to help or have an initial conversation if any of you would like to speak with us. And otherwise, great to meet you, and let's stay in touch.
Thank you very much also from my side, and have a great rest of your day.